What if the most expensive mistake you ever made started with a noise you almost ignored? Not a crash, not a catastrophic failure, just a small, persistent sound. The kind that shows up one morning and stays quiet enough that you convince yourself it can wait. This is the story of how a $500 repair estimate became a $20,000 disaster that took 11 months, 4 repair shops, and one very difficult phone call to fully understand. If you've ever driven past a warning sign on your dashboard and told yourself you'd deal with it later, this story is for you. You're watching Car Information Master. Real stories, real consequences, real machines. Jason Mercer was 41 years old and working as a project manager for a construction firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, when he first noticed the sound coming from his 2016 Ford Explorer. He'd owned the vehicle for 4 years at that point. It had 114,000 miles on it, had been serviced regularly, and aside from routine wear, items had never given him any serious trouble. The sound was a faint ticking that appeared on cold starts and faded after about 3 minutes of warm-up. He mentioned it to a coworker who told him it was probably just the top end needing an oil change. He got one. The ticking stayed. He took the Explorer to a local shop near his office on a Wednesday morning. The service advisor listened to the engine idle for about 30 seconds, nodded in the practiced way that service advisors do, and told Jason they'd pull the codes and do a basic inspection. The inspection came back with a recommendation to replace the variable camshaft timing solenoid on the passenger side, a fairly common wear item on the 3.5-liter EcoBoost at higher mileage. The quote was $480, including labor. Jason approved it without hesitation. He'd been expecting something in that range. He picked the car up that Friday afternoon and drove home feeling like the problem was behind him. It wasn't. The ticking didn't disappear. It softened slightly, or maybe he wanted to believe it had. Over the next 3 weeks, he paid close attention on every cold start, listening for the sound, the way you listen for something in a house that you can't quite identify. It was there every morning. Subtle, rhythmic, a faint metallic percussion that lasted 2 minutes, sometimes 3, before the engine warmed up enough to smooth it out. He went back to the same shop. They ran diagnostics again, found a new code for the driver's side camshaft solenoid, and recommended replacing that one as well. Another $320. He paid it. He drove home. The ticking continued. By the 4th week after the second repair, something had changed in the sound. It wasn't louder exactly, but it had developed a different quality, a slight irregularity in the rhythm that hadn't been there before. It now occasionally persisted for 4 or 5 minutes after startup, rather than fading at 3. He returned to the shop a 3rd time and was met by a different service advisor, a younger one, who listened to the description of the problem with a particular expression of someone trying to hide that they're not certain what to say. They kept the car overnight. The next morning, the shop called to tell him the engine had a timing chain tensioner issue and recommend a timing chain service. New tensioners, guides, and chain. The estimate was $2,200. Jason paused on the phone for a long moment. He asked whether this was related to the solenoids they'd already replaced. The advisor said it might be contributing to the same symptoms. He asked whether the solenoid replacements had been necessary. The answer he got was technically qualified in a way that didn't actually answer the question. He approved the repair because he felt, by that point, that he was too far in to change direction. The timing chain service took 3 days. He picked the car up on a Thursday and drove directly onto the highway. The sound was different now, quieter at cold start, the rhythmic ticking almost inaudible. He felt cautious optimism. He drove it to work Friday. He drove it over the weekend. By Monday morning, something new had appeared. Not the original ticking, but a faint rattle that only showed up at idle when the engine was fully warm. It was low frequency, subtle, and nothing he'd heard before. He sat in his driveway for 3 minutes listening to it before driving to work. He did not go back to the original shop. He took the Explorer to a different facility. a larger, dealer-affiliated service center on the other side of the city. He explained everything from the beginning, both solenoids, the timing chain service, the new sound. The technician assigned to his case drove the vehicle, documented the idle rattle, and requested time for a full inspection. 2 days later, the service center called with news that Jason had not been prepared to receive. The oil passages feeding the timing chain system showed evidence of varnish buildup, consistent with extended intervals between oil changes, or the use of incorrect oil viscosity at some point in the vehicle's history. The timing chain service performed at the previous shop had addressed the mechanical wear, but not the underlying cause: contaminated oil passages that were restricting flow to the upper engine. The idle rattle was hydraulic lifter noise caused by inadequate lubrication reaching the top end. And in the course of the inspection, the technician had found something the earlier shop had missed entirely: a hairline crack in one of the plastic timing chain guides that had apparently been present for some time and had gone undetected. A fragment of that guide had circulated through the oiling system and lodged in an oil passage near the rear cylinder head. The recommended repair was a full top-end rebuild, including both cylinder heads, new lifters, new camshafts on the affected bank, and a complete flush and reinspection of the oiling system. The estimate was $9,400. Jason sat with that number for 3 days before calling back. In those 3 days, he got a second opinion from an independent engine specialist who confirmed the diagnosis and quoted $8,800. He called his wife. He called his father, who had worked in auto repair for 30 years before retiring. His father asked one question: "What did the oil look like when you had it changed most recently?" Jason said he couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at the oil between changes. His father didn't say anything critical. He just said he understood, and that the same thing had happened to more people than Jason would believe. The engine specialist did the rebuild. It took 3 weeks. The final bill was $9,140 after a parts discount the shop extended because, the owner told Jason, he could tell the situation had gone far enough. Jason paid it and drove home in a vehicle that ran the way it had 4 years ago. Smooth, quiet, confident. The idle rattle was gone. The cold start ticking was gone. The engine sounded like an engine that had been properly cared for and properly repaired. The total cost from the first solenoid replacement to the engine rebuild was $19,760. The timing chain guide fragment that had lodged in the oil passage, the piece that had prevented full lubrication of the top end and caused the lifter damage, was approximately the size of a thumbnail. A plastic fragment weighing perhaps 2 grams had been circulating through the oil system for an indeterminate period, slowly starving critical components of lubrication on every startup until the cumulative damage reached the point where a rebuild was the only viable path forward. The first solenoid replacement may have been necessary. The second may have been premature. The timing chain service addressed real wear, but missed the contamination that was causing it. Each decision was made in good faith by shops working from the information available to them at that moment. And yet, each decision had led to the next problem rather than solving the original one, in a cascade that took 11 months and nearly $20,000 to fully exhaust. Jason still drives the Explorer. He checks his oil every other fill-up now. He uses the manufacturer-specified viscosity and changes it at the recommended interval. He says he's not angry at the shops involved, not entirely. He understands that intermittent mechanical problems are genuinely difficult to fully diagnose without catching them at exactly the right moment. What he is, he says, is different, more attentive, less willing to dismiss something small as something he can address later. Later has a way of costing more than you expect. There is almost always a moment, somewhere early in these stories, where the outcome was still preventable. A sound that could have been investigated more thoroughly. A repair that could have asked a harder question about why the component failed, rather than simply replacing what failed. A warning sign, dismissed as minor, that was, in fact, the beginning of something much larger. The machines we depend on every day don't fail dramatically without warning. They fail incrementally, in small signals, in patterns that only become clear in hindsight. The cost of listening is almost always lower than the cost of waiting to hear something louder. If you've ever had a repair turn into something you didn't see coming, or if you want to make sure you never do, Car Information Master is built for exactly that. Real automotive stories, real lessons, real machines. Subscribe and stay ahead of what your car is trying to tell you.